and protect your sanity. So we put this session together because there are a lot of migration approaches that don't. It's really easy for migration to go off the rails early due to poor planning. So I'm Kuhl. I'm the Director of Technology at Chief, where I oversee our development, migration, and accessibility work.
And I'm Sam Elliott. I'm a lead associate at Phase 1. I currently manage the Drupal implementation and maintenance of the Department of Transportation's CMS enterprise system.
So Sam and I have been friends for a decade, a word that is really beginning to bum us both out. And we've also worked together several times over the course of this, and we have roots as project managers and content strategists, so we put this session together to share a bit of the insight we've learned from far too many Drupal migrations. So we put the session together not primarily for developers, so if you are in here to learn how to use the Migrate module, you can leave. We will not be offended because that's not what we're planning to talk about. Instead, this is really for content strategists, project managers, stakeholders, and other people who are really impacted by whether or not the migration goes successfully and have to have more of a hand in the planning of it. So because migrations are, let's all be really honest, migrations are really dry to talk about. So we decided to kind of conceptualize a couple of different types of migrations you can have with the personas of institute.gov and nonprofit.org. These are completely fictional sites, but they are an amalgamation of large-scale government migrations that we've both done and smaller-scale nonprofit or just small government websites we've both done in addition to commercial. So I'll be talking a little bit more about a large government website, which would be about 30,000 pages, 5,000 documents. It's got a fairly healthy timeline, clocking in at 10 months to do all of the work. And in this, it's still pretty common, though it is, for obvious reasons, decreasing in how much you're going to see it. Percentages coming from a huge static HTML site into Drupal. I have war stories, believe me. And we're saying for institute.gov, for a large government site like this, you would hope you have a much more experienced development team. Because if you try to move 30,000 pages by hand, you're going to have a very unfortunate time. So the main goal with a large site like this that has a lot of policy documentation would just be to migrate the important content as is and move on with your life. There's not a lot of restructuring to do there.
Contrary for a site like nonprofit.org, which would be a smaller site, maybe 800 pages or so, maybe 100 documents, the goal for a site like this might be something like refreshing the content and really rethinking the information you're putting out there to the public. So in this scenario that we've created, it's more like a 6-month timeline that's really going to focus on the content piece. And luckily, I got thrown the bone in our little imagination scenario of a custom CMS to Drupal rather than static HTML. And in this scenario, we would have a smaller development team and more strategy and content people to help with that kind of content rewrite, reorganization, and auditing piece.
So the big difference between these two sites is one is getting from point A to point B more or less successfully, and the other has to have a lot of time to actually rework the content, which anyone will tell you is going to drastically affect your timeline.
But in either case, it doesn't really matter if it's big or small, purple or yellow, you're going to follow the same migration approach. You want to do an inventory of your content, you want to audit it, you want to map it to where it's going to go in your new system, actually move it there, and then review it. No matter what, those are the basic steps that you're going to follow, and we'll talk through these scenarios, what are the general processes, and then how specifically might they change for the two different large and small projects.
So a content inventory, if you have any sort of a decent migration process, you should be starting your migration with an inventory of what is actually on your site. Surprisingly, I do have to say this to people when I undertake a migration project. I've worked with some people who have genuinely believed that doing a content inventory should mean clicking around the website and recording those URLs in a spreadsheet. This is a bad idea. Do not do that. If you have a 30,000 page website, you're going to be there for a while. Instead, the way that we try to find out how many pages are on a website and what those pages are is by running a link checker tool. And typically, you can use Xenu for Windows. Xenu is a really awesome tool. And then you can use its knockoff cousin, Integrity, for Mac. I was very sad when I moved to an all-Mac development shop because I couldn't use Xenu anymore. And both of these crawlers are going to go through and hit every single link on your website and return what that link is and put that into a spreadsheet for you. The good news is that you're going to get a lot of metadata in there, like what type of file it is, sometimes the title of the page if you're lucky, The bad news is you're also going to get external links and 404s, and you have to spend a bit of time doing manual cleanup. So after you actually have done that manual cleanup, you're going to wind up with something that looks like this. Hopefully you can put it in Google Drive so that it can be a tracking document throughout the entire process. This is for the Commission of Fine Arts, which is the project Chief launched recently-ish. And it's got, you can see all the URLs over there, and then you can see that at this point we've already gone through and we've figured out what content types this might actually have, and we'll talk a little bit later about how we get that node ID value there and why it is important. So if you're working on a really large government website, your inventory is probably going to be huge and basically impossible to sort through. You're going to have to spend a lot of time going through that to see what you actually have. And being able to get patterns from the URL becomes really important to you. The unfortunate news is that very large sites often have very inconsistent directory structure because more often than not, they've been being managed by large web teams who are throwing documents up as they become available. And it can be a little bit difficult to get insight about what's actually in there. Finally, it's going to have a lot of documents. This particular site had 5,000 in our persona, but my largest was 20,000 documents that had to be migrated. You have to budget time to move this over, and this is when you find out how many you actually have.
The reverse of that is that you might have a small site or nonprofit type group or a small government entity that has a small URL list. You might even get lucky enough that they are pretty structured URLs, but you're still going to discover things that you didn't know in this inventory process. A lot of 404s might indicate that your content is old and hasn't been updated in a while. You might also find different types of images or other documents that you didn't expect to be there. For instance, you might expect, hopefully not 5,000, but you might expect a lot of PDFs. That's pretty typical across all sites. But maybe you didn't realize they also had 5,000 images to go along with every page of their website, or 5,000 Excel spreadsheets. So this is a good chance to see kind of take stock of all the different assets that are there. In this scenario, I got stuck with a lot of images, which is not great for anyone because now we have to figure out which images go and stay, and that's a whole fun process in and of itself. So basically, there are a few places that you can engage your content owners to really help with this process. The title of this presentation references content owners because we both believe in our combined heart of hearts. Let's not talk about this. Okay. But yes, our combined many years of experience, that engaging the content owners right off the bat is the very best thing to do. Please, please, please do not finish a website and then go to your content owners and say, look what we did for you. It's going to go badly, even if it's great. So the earlier you can get them engaged, the better. And I suggest this is even a stage where you can do it. Present them and email them if necessary, an inventory summary explaining to them what you found. If you found a section of 5,000 about pages, let them know, hey, your about section looks a little large. Do you really have that much general information you want to share? Things like the image discovery, that would be something that if I were running this nonprofit.org project, I would definitely talk to my content owners and stakeholders about right away. Are these images important? Did you just randomly throw in stock photos from stockphoto.com? Make sure that you're talking about this stuff early. Also let them know that you're looking for them to actually do something with this inventory. You want them to help you find anything that may not seem right. The crawler might have missed a whole section of the website if there was a bug or your internet dropped or something. So if you think there are only 20 news releases and you're having a nice little party, they might correct you and say, actually, we go back to 1997, that number does not seem right. So this is a chance for them to help you kind of fine-tune your inventory and really clean it up a bit. And then it also gives you the opportunity to explain anything that's going to be a challenge for you in terms of timing or level of effort. So 5,000 PDF documents might mean accessibility team involvement. It might mean pulling stuff out of those documents to make web pages. So that might end up taking a little bit more time. And this is really a good place to flag it.
One other thing we should say about content inventories is that we highly recommend they be done if you are a contractor. We recommend they be done before you bid on the project and before you set that scope. If you don't, you may find yourself doing a lot of free work, especially if it's a firm fixed price contract. But also, this part, the level of effort, that is on both sides. So right now at Chief, we're working on a project for a rather large initiative to streamline 40 plus sites into one site. So that inventory was really critical. And we're actually not doing the migration ourselves. We're working with our client team to do the migration. So having them understand what their content owner team needs to look like, what they need to do at later stages, understanding you have 5,000 pages here, this is what you are looking at, is really important here, not just for you to orient around, but for them to orient around.
So once you've finally oriented everyone, you're all on the same page about what's existing on the current site. Then you actually need to go through it and figure out what you're actually going to move. I pray that everyone is convincing their clients or their stakeholders to reduce the number of pages they have. The internet seems to have a problem with bloat, and I would like to help slim it down. I think we all can be partners in that effort. So this is the chance to really do that, to help them understand why it is beneficial to not move everything they've ever thought and put on the internet. And the key areas where you can really find some good efficiencies in this are in age, redundancy, and relevance. Those are kind of my 3 tenets that I share with my team and with the content teams. Age being, let's just go ahead and agree, anything before 2010 and 2015 is probably not relevant. Not necessarily always not relevant, but probably. Most people are not going to be looking at event calendars from 6 years ago. They don't care anymore. Like Twitter has already made that completely irrelevant. So if you can agree ahead of time on a certain time frame, that's a big place where you can go ahead and just say, we can cut this whole section because it's old. Redundancy is a big one, especially with projects like what Kat was mentioning, where you're consolidating many offices into one area. Or even if you're just doing a redesign, over the years, people start creating their own little pockets. And once you try to look at it all from a big bird's eye view, you start seeing duplicative information. So coming up with a plan ahead of time about how you're going to merge those things and who has final authority is something you want to be planning for and talking with your content owners and stakeholders about. And then relevance is a little bit trickier. That's the piece that you're really going to need your content owners to help you with. You can get some information from your key stakeholders about agency priorities or hot topics, and that can help you to at least flag things that seem a little outside of the box. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to make that call for you. So when you're looking at this, there are a few areas that you can really get some good wins on. These are my kind of auto opt-in, opt-out groups. Once you've determined that your age range, there are big sections of serial content you can just go ahead and throw out immediately. News releases, events, those types of things that are serialized can typically be cut immediately. There are also some areas that you can go ahead and just opt in, and you don't have to click on those pages and review them because they're not changing their agency bios. We don't have to go through and look at those. They want them all to move over. Their mission statement, vision, all that, it's going to just come over as is. Let's just go ahead and mark it yes. We don't even have to ask them to review that. And then this isn't necessarily a yes or no question, but it's very important when you're thinking about the horse trading piece of the migration discussion. Anything that is easy to migrate might not be the place you want to draw your line in the sand. If it's not going to take your team very much time or effort to move something, maybe don't fight over it. Maybe choose a different battle that is going to cost more, and you'll have kind of a little bit more leverage there to say, well, we gave you this other thing that you wanted. Maybe let's leave this thing aside because it's a little bit more difficult.
So an audit for a large government site might show that to you that 2,000 press releases are more than 5 years old. 5 years old is your cutoff, then congratulations, you don't have to migrate 2,000 pieces of content. It's probably going to find that offices have redundant content, especially if you've had offices running different parts of the website up to this point. So you might have policies that are actually agency-wide showing up in the offices because the larger site just didn't get it together to have a coherent place to put them. Hopefully you're going to see some clear content types because oftentimes you're just putting out the same types of content again and again. Press releases, events, policy documents. These are pretty consistent in terms of their metadata and their structure, so this might be an easy win for scripted migrations. But it's also common, especially if you're refreshing a site that was done in 1998, as my personal favorite site that we've worked on was. You're probably going to be updating that menu structure a lot. So you need to plan time as you're going through your audit later in the process to move things in the menu, which is often no small feat in Drupal if you're talking about tens of thousands of pages.
For smaller sites where you're not as focused on the volume, the types of things you might find during your audit is things like content everyone assumed was good isn't actually good. Some of your landing page content, people thought, oh yeah, we're not going to have to worry about that, actually shows data and other things that no longer even are accurate or relevant to the agency. So that might be a little bit of a holdup. Also, this about section I kind of alluded to earlier, it's pretty common, not just with small sites, that your about section can get a little out of control. And there's this divergence between how much the public cares versus how much the agency cares. So trying to kind of bridge that gap and help them to find efficiencies in that area will really help. And making the argument that the easier people can find information, the better might be a good in there.
And while it's outside the scope of this talk, I'd highly recommend that you pair your audit with a baseline analytics report. If you have access to Google Analytics, check and see where people are spending most of their time. If there's a ton of content in a section people aren't paying attention to, that will really help you make the argument for what they should be doing with that content in the long term.
And then another thing I actually heard mentioned in an earlier presentation is that sometimes, and by sometimes I mean almost always, information in documents shouldn't be in a document on the internet. It isn't searchable, it isn't good for anyone really. So you can find information buried inside documents that's better served as a web page. I've actually found contact information in a PDF. There was a link on the sidebar to contact us, and it was a PDF document with contact information. So that can happen, and then when you're looking at your documents, it's a thing to consider that some of those might actually be pages. In fact, at phase 1, we consider the two when we do proposals the same thing. When we say our cap is X number of pages, we mean pages and documents because we treat documents like pages. Now, when you're talking to your content owners at this phase of the game, there's a few points that you want to interact with them. One is before you even start, and that's when you're agreeing on all the criteria. We talked about kind of the time cap, have that discussion early on so everyone's on the same page, and let them know that it doesn't necessarily mean that they will, like, you're not going to delete that content the moment they say, okay, no more past 5 years ago. It just means when you provide them the audited inventory, there's going to be a bunch of no's that if they choose to go through, they might find something that really is important from 7 years ago, and that can still be migrated. They have that option. It's just an easier way for you to cull through that information faster. You also want to stress how important it is for them to participate in this relevance question. Most of the time, you're not going to have the subject matter expertise to say that a particular topic area isn't really relevant to the agency's business practices. So you want them to partner with you in that effort and help them understand why maybe every single program and initiative that they run doesn't necessarily have to have its own landing section in the top navigation of your website. Also, for a site like nonprofit.org, especially where you're going to be updating content or rewriting it, you want to let them know as soon as possible how long they have to do that. You don't want to end up running into a group that says, yeah, we want to rewrite our content, but we don't have time. Can you push the date, right? Your stakeholders are not going to be too happy if you have to push a launch because one content owner needed to rewrite 20 pages and didn't have time. Let them know in advance, and also let them know that Drupal is a wonderful content management system where they can log in afterward and update information. It doesn't mean that because it didn't happen during the migration effort that they will never, ever again have a chance to change the information there. And then also, do a little bit of salesmanship and let them know that this is really going to help their website in the long run. The more they can cut it down, the more findable things are going to be, the better their search results are going to be. Get good keyword information dense pages on the website and let the rest lie. That's what contact information is for.
And pro tip, it helps a lot if you talk about how much people hate their search, then telling them they want to cut down their content and make it more relevant, and that will improve their search, really helps that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So once you've figured out what you're going to move and you know how many pages you have, it's time to figure out where your pages are going to live on the new site. I've had a few conversations where I've had to convince people that this is important, but in Drupal, especially if you're coming from a static site, you might think, well, if it's in the root, you're going to just move it to the root. It's all going to live there. But of course, in Drupal, this is reflected in some key areas, including your URL, your breadcrumbs, and the contextual navigation. This is really orienting information for users about where things need to live on the site. So you have to put some effort into determining that during your migration. Because if you're just running the migrate module or something, it's all going to get dumped in, it's going to get migrated, but it's not going to get put contextually where it needs to be in that larger sitemap. You can do this by identifying content types, and oftentimes that'll knock out a huge percentage of your content because all your news releases are just going to live in the same place unless you're doing something very wrong with your life.
Don't do that.
Same thing with events and a few others, but if you do have like basic pages that are sometimes in this section of the website and sometimes in this section, you actually have to drag them and get them to the right spot. So you're going to want to start with your content types and then work your way into what you have to identify manually. The more that you are changing your site dramatically, the more important this is. So we've had projects where we've needed to really overhaul the information architecture because clients were complaining about users, sometimes clients, are complaining about how difficult it is to find information on the site. And that means you have to dramatically overhaul how you're thinking about the website, which means you have to put a lot of work into this mapping.
And I think we've all probably seen this in recent years, especially in moving from an office or org chart sort of structure that all especially government websites used to have, to a more topic-based, that is exactly the candidate for this. You really need to make sure you know if it used to be in Office A, but now it really needs to go under topic B. You're showing your users where it's going to go, so they'll be happy and accept it when they see it, and your team, so they don't put it in the wrong place.
So here for institute.gov, large sites like this, like we mentioned, there are often a lot of structured content types, and proportionally, you might have way more of that than you have of basic page content. Still means you have to plan for a lot of content to be moved because it's a 30,000 page website, so like 10% of that is still a really large number. But you can usually kill a lot of them just by focusing on your content types first.
And vice versa, you might have a site that is much more proportionally generic basic page content. Program sites, campaign sites, that type of thing might have a lot more general information, nonprofits as well, and less of the grants, policies, news releases, events type of structure and zero content that federal websites tend to have.
So as you're working on this mapping process, you're going to start by associating things with content types. That's a quick win. Then move into reviewing basic page or other content that is going to get mixed around that navigation. And sometimes you can just keep the navigation from the old site, which is great. Just if you have a clear URL structure, you can just say, keep the same structure and then move forward, especially if you're not doing an overhaul. But for everything else, you do want to record where it's going to go in that inventory, because otherwise your developers are going to try to move it, your manual migrators are going to move it, your interns are going to try to move it, and they're not going to know where it goes, and it's going to create way more work for you later than having it all tracked in one place. So at this point, you have to actually do the content migration because people get really mad when you don't.
So you really want to start with a good game plan. This whole presentation is about a general game plan, but more specifically, when you're talking about the actual copy and paste or scripted migration, you want to make sure that you've reviewed your team and their skill set before you think of what your plan is going to be. I've seen a lot of proposals that were geared toward a scripted migration, and then they realized the development team didn't have the skill set. Big problem for timeline, budget.
The one person who can do a scripted migration quits, for example.
And then vice versa, you might have a team that is really development heavy, but the content doesn't really bear out any scripting, and your developers are going to be pulling their hair out because they're trying to debug these scripts that just won't work because the content isn't structured to support that type of work. So you really need to look at the skill set of your team and also the content before you make a decision about the plan. And when you're considering the content, what you really need to focus on is how structured the current content is. Is it really easy to map the individual pieces of the content to the fields in Drupal? And how much content is there per type? If you have only 20 news releases, celebrate. And then realize you don't need to write a script for that. There's only 20. Just copy and paste. The time you're going to sink into writing a script, even though it might be perfectly suited for a script, isn't worth it. So I think, Kat, you were saying you tend to cap out at around 500.
Usually, if something is less than 500, I'm probably not even going to consider scripting it. That varies by the nature of the development team that you have and how much experience you have in that. But generally speaking, I find that if you're going to troubleshoot it and spend time figuring out why that field didn't move and why that date was malformed, it's just not worth your time to get out of bed in the morning to write a script for that. But of course, if you're looking at something that has 2,000 pages and it is remotely scriptable, you want to do that. And even if you know that you're going to spend a lot of time in QA, you might have a script go and populate the bare bones of it and then have people go in and manually update it, which is also an option.
So just some quick tips about this that you want to keep in mind when you're thinking about your approach is that for any approach, annotate screenshots where possible. It's going to save you a lot of headaches and a lot of questions. You don't want your migrators, be they manual migrators or scripters, coming to you every single time with questions. So if you can just grab a quick screenshot from the current site and say, I drew a box around this is the date field. I drew a box around this is your related links area. This is your byline. Let them know what you mean when you say, migrate these pages to this place. Otherwise, you're going to get things thrown in the wrong fields, and your QA process is going to be a nightmare.
You're also going to want to phase the migration by content type. So if you have a 30,000 page website, don't try to start it all at the same time and finish it all in the same time. Rather, break it into, okay, this is our press release migration, it's our event migration, it's our basic page migration. Work through the migration of it and then start the QA rather than trying to QA all of it at the same time. I have to have this in there, which I'm not really going to belabor this point, but if you haven't thought about a redirect strategy, you are really, really, really hurting yourselves. So if you're moving a large site, you have to make sure that you add the old URLs in there so that they can become redirects. You can do it through scripting. These redirect modules are pretty okay for this. And then if not, this is my gift to all of you if you are not aware of this. You can add the node IDs to each line of your content inventory as people are migrating. So you assign a chunk to someone and you say, move all this content and then put the node ID in this column. When you're done, you can use a module called path redirect import to automatically generate redirects for everything from the old URL to that new node ID. This has saved my life on multiple migrations, so I highly recommend it.
It's also going to save you in the QA period because you're not going to have to spend a lot of time going back and editing old links that are buried inside content. They'll still work. And then as that page gets updated naturally in the life cycle of its time on the internet, hopefully, the links can always be updated at that point.
So second step is to use third-party content when you can to keep your migration effort low. What we mean by this is don't migrate all your federal register notices. Just use the regulations.gov API for it, which is actually really badass. You might not want to move all your old job postings if you are government because they're already on USA Jobs. You can just figure out how to pull that feed down and then integrate it. Personally, I've gotten really lucky with getting data from third-party systems. So the Commission of Fine Arts, the Federal Trade Commission, both of these had external databases that were redundant to the website in just very small certain areas, even though it was a static HTML migration. So rather than trying to parse that content, we asked about, do you have these databases, and found that we did, and imported that using feeds, which is not quite as bad as writing a full migration script, but still really is going to reduce your overall effort. And then you're going to script whatever else you can. So you can script database to database. This is the holy grail, and if you're doing this kind of migration, congratulations. Migrate script is really, really great for that. You can also do database to database with just a little bit of parsing. So let's say that you had press releases, you have this long body field, and at the bottom you have contact information. You really want contact information to be a separate field from here on out. You can scrape that, you can do a script for that field to get it into the new one, and then have some parsing that happens and divides that information out into different fields, even if it was just one field on the old site, assuming that your backend developer is skilled enough. And the third one, which is never as much fun, is actually scraping content from an old HTML website. You do need a very skilled backend developer to do this. And if you don't have one, then you're much better off trying to just move things manually, because they're going to be writing regexes to say, okay, if you see this pattern, then you want to put it in this field. If you see this pattern, then you want to put it in that field. And if anything goes wrong with that old content or you have malformed HTML, you're going to spend a lot of time in the QA section. But with that said, if you have 10,000 pages of one content type, you probably still want to go ahead and think about it. And the last, which is the unfortunate part, have no silver bullet for you. If you've gone through all of that, you're still going to have to move some things manually. Maybe that's just populating records that you started from scraping like an index page, and now you're going to go in and beat them up with real content. That's fine, but be aware you are going to have to do some things manually. The Migrate module cannot fix all your problems, especially if you are substantially changing the site. But just pray for it, it's not that bad.
With alcohol. So the QA piece comes in next, right? You've done all your moving, and now you actually have to make sure that everybody did it correctly. This is the kind of heart of the matter. This is the piece. Yeah, this is when you avoid the yelling. This is the piece where you actually get people to smile at you, hopefully, when they see everything come to life. So my focus on this, because in almost all situations, even a small site like our little nonprofit.org that was only 800 pages, you're probably not going to have the time to check every single page with a line editor who is great, right? So focus on your biggest problems, or even the things that people are going to notice the most. And what I mean by that is things that you focused on a lot during the other phases of the project. So if you heavily rewrote or restructured a section, you want to pay close attention to that because other people will have it on their minds. Things that you haggled over, like maybe someone said we need 6 years of press releases, you said no, we only need 2. Make sure you pay attention to that, because if there's any problem with that section, the people who wanted it the other way are going to point it out. So to really make your selling points, you need to make sure that things that you bargained for really shine. And then also check for broken links. It is never great when you ask someone to look at a site and they keep finding broken links all over the place. They're not going to be happy. You're not going to be happy. So it's a quick win and an easy thing to do before you get into the heart of asking someone to join you in this review process.
Yeah, taking the time to do this is going to avoid that moment when people completely lose confidence in the project that you're doing because they found a broken link. And that does happen all the time. If someone comes to your site, they click a few links, and they wind up at a dead page, they're going to start thinking that no matter how good the site is or how good the rest of the migration is, that you didn't do something pretty fundamental that you should have taken the time to do. So run those link checkers you ran at the beginning, Xenu and Mac, you can run them. You can also use the link checker module in Drupal, which has some bugs but is really solid for this kind of thing. So for institute.gov, because we have a development team, we're going to do a little more automated QA. We're still going to spend time focusing on the big fires because you just have to. But we're also going to do a SQL query to make sure that any field we consider required is populated for each type. So if we're assuming that all press releases have a date, we run a query and see that not all press releases have a date. We know that our migration went bad somewhere. If there's a malformed date that couldn't get pulled in. Or we all can also run a SQL query to identify that a redirect exists for every single node of the website, or maybe every node other than the ones that you're doing a big section-wide redirect for. But we are still at the end, once we've done all our due diligence, we're going to utilize content owners for an in-depth QA. And before you do that, you really should have done a little sample checking of each content type just on principle alone.
And on that point, there are a few ways when you're doing this manual checking that you can really get some efficiencies, and that's what the nonprofit.org team would be focusing on. Things like any index pages you have. My favorite is the press release page. I know we keep harping on it, but everybody has press releases, so it's an easy example. But you're going to have an index page that lists out all your press releases with date, title, a link, maybe some other metadata. It's easy to quickly sort that page and see if there's any date fields missing, any titles missing. A quick scan will show you if there's weird typos or characters, special character sets that didn't get entered. So those index pages, those views in Drupal are a great resource. And if you have the skill set on your team or the time to even build some on the back end that you can then delete, it's even a great tool for doing checks like that later. It doesn't have to be a view that you're going to keep on the public side of your site. It might just be one you build for the purposes of QA. And then to that end, you want to check sample sets of all of your content types. And it depends on the number of items in that content type, how big your sample set should be, and also kind of your client and how much time you have. But you do want to keep that randomized. I strongly suggest to encourage your team not to just go back and check the most recent ones that were edited or the first set that you moved in, because in either case, it could go one way or the other that you just caught someone on a good day or a bad day, and basically that big chunk is all going to be the same. So really getting a random sample throughout the life cycle of that content types migration is going to help you with that. So when you're engaging your content owners, the biggest thing that you need to do at this phase is set their expectations. Please do not email your content owners and say, here's a stage link, stage.nonprofit.org, go review the site, let me know what you think. You're going to get very, very mixed feedback. People are not going to be sure what they're supposed to be doing. So make sure you let them know what it is exactly you want them to do. If you need approvals, make sure you make that clear. If you have a certain section you want them to pay attention to, make that clear. And also make sure that you're letting them know if you're wanting them to check for things like design, visual problems, missing information, actual line edits. Based off of the project that you have going on, it might depend on what you want them to do. So let them know what that is. And also make sure you agree how you're going to be tracking what it is they're doing. You can do it within Drupal through like a view with a checkbox that just says, I reviewed this page. You could use something in your workflow, like a workbench status, to say this page was QA'd before you ever publish it live for launch. Or you could use that inventory that you created that your team has been working with and just add an extra column that says content owner review. And just make sure that you're tracking what's been reviewed, so that when you do find problems somewhere down the line, you can say, hey, we did our due diligence. This was just a one-off. This isn't representative of the whole site.
So the most important thing I think to take away from this is that the more you engage the content owners, the better that launch is going to go. Ultimately, Drupal is a content management system. Your content owners are king. They're going to have to work with it later. They're going to have to add more content to it later. They're going to have to edit the content later. And oftentimes they have the ear of a lot of the stakeholders on the project, whether that's formally or informally. So when you launch a new website and the people who have to work with it, or the people who are responsible for the content, go to a stakeholder and say, this is just the worst thing I've ever seen. I can't find my content. I have broken links in my content. You as a firm or as the team inside an agency are going to get a really bad reputation really quickly. But if they've seen the website a lot, they understand what's happening with their content, they feel like they were part of the process and they gave a lot of buy-in, then you're going to have happy content owners and happy teams, which is what we're all looking for. And you'll have your sanity a little bit more protected too. So thanks a lot for listening, and now we can take questions.
I'm wondering how detailed do you guys get with the content type, like mapping, the documentation for that? I know I'm a developer, but I've done project management in the past as well. And from a development standpoint, I think it's really, really useful to have each content type actually write up the fields that you're going to be using. Is that something you guys do?
This one. So I've done it a couple different ways. It really depends on my developers, actually, on how I do it. Some developers want a lot of detail. They want you to tell them what type of widget should be in that particular field. And some developers just need that annotated screenshot and they can take it from there. So it really depends on the system that you're using. If you're migrating people into an existing system, an existing Drupal system, which is what we do down at Transportation, we kind of have firm rules about what things mean. So my developers don't need to know that it's a Boolean checkbox versus the drop-down list, right? They already know what that field is going to be, so I just give them annotated screenshots. But on a project where there might be some question, you definitely want to make sure that you provide that. So it depends on the developer.
And I'd also say that it depends on at what point. Like we don't typically we have the site building part come before the migration part. So at that point we don't need to tell them everything. Instead, we need to just tell them, you should migrate here. Here's an annotated screenshot saying what the fields are, because the fields already exist. The developers already have their bearings. And then when you're doing that inventory, you're like, use this content type. Here's an annotated screenshot. Go. Get in different situations at different times.
My question is about the balance between the site building and this whole process, right? Mm-hmm. So with particularly, I guess, with both of them, particularly in your example of a large institute.gov, going from static HTML to Drupal, vastly different. There's been no thought given to what a content type is, let alone what fields should be. Like, where in the model is building the site so that you have something to migrate into, because you'll need to have audited or at least inventoried, I guess, before you can even start to consider what are your content types, etc.
Completely, like we actually considered originally showing in the timeline here what it might look like to see what else was going on alongside this project. It's usually not really a one-to-one because you're trying to phase it by content type. You might be doing an inventory and an audit of press releases and using that to build the content type, but you might be having your basic page content type just exist regardless of what it is and make only minor modifications during that migration. So typically, I would tend to say that you're doing an inventory and an audit before you do the site building, or you might do some basic site building things that you can look at the site and see, okay, I get where these fields are coming from. And then during your mapping, you're going to refine that a lot so that by the time you get to your actual migration, you have put a lot of thought into what that's going to look like, because the UX is a different process than the migration, but it should be really closely informed by each other. And hopefully you have a content strategist helping to oversee the whole thing.
As a brief follow-up to that, like how phased of an approach can you have per content type? You know what I mean? Because it's very like, okay, we're going to make grants, and then we're going to call grants done. But then you've got funding opportunities, which are very similar to grants or something like that. You know what I mean? And now you've got to readdress what grants was because you've got this other one that, we weren't sure about that.
Can I do it?
Go ahead.
So it's usually better, in my view, it's better to go ahead and migrate as much as you can of one type and then go back and have to iterate that and add a few extra fields or alter it a bit, add in some extra taxonomy maybe, than it is to leave it and not have anything done. There are some rare migrations where that will completely screw you over and you'll end up finding that you moved on something way before you were ready and then it just all went bad. But that tends, in my experience, to be more rare than oh crap, we totally ran out of time to do this, and if we just started it earlier, it would have been okay. So that's my part of the answer.
Yeah, and then just to add to that, you definitely want to do the inventory piece at least before you do anything else. So the inventory should give you some really good insight into at least the basic ones. Again, my little baby pet example, news releases, they're pretty generic, they're pretty standard, so there might be some slight front end stuff that changes. You want to show the byline in a different place or something, but typically there are some key content types that are kind of set based off looking at that inventory and your initial conversations with your stakeholders and your content owners. So once you've got those set pieces, those can be moving. So a good example, we're working on the Federal Transit Administration's website, FTA, right now. And we are still haggling with, we have content owners who haven't even replied to us yet with their inventories for the auditing piece, and we're still trying to track them down with our stakeholder with the bat. So while that's going on, I mean, he doesn't have a literal bat, it's his figurative power bat. So while that's going on here, and me and my analyst team are chasing that rope down, I already have my developers working on the Federal Register API, the news view, because we know those pieces are going to be there no matter what. And then how those end up connecting to basic pages is my problem for September.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Cool. That's helpful.
I was just saying that going back to your point about getting rid of old and redundant relevant content, that can often be a difficult conversation.
Yes.
And if you can, using your analytics and also sort of what's going on in your organization, point out that old content is hurting you. For example, I work for the public broadcasting station, a classical music radio station, and we had playlists going back for 5 years. And our FM department really wanted to keep the playlist because we had the information and we're all about sharing information, making things public. And we finally had to sit down and say, look, our analytics show that people are not looking at these old playlists. And when they are, they're doing it just so that they can complain about how much Bach they're hearing. So, they were serious, they were downloading them and they were doing statistical analyses. So that they didn't like what we were hearing. So that was,
this is my favorite story of all time.
I might just want to bring you on other presentations. Yeah, and Kat had kind of mentioned this point, but we're having that, well, any federal project is going to have this problem, let's just be honest. Because of the transparency and FOIA initiatives, people feel like public websites have to be a catalog of any thought any federal agency has ever had in the history of its life cycle, right? It's just the challenge. So helping them understand, and I said this to a client the other day, and he was like, you're coming to every meeting with me. I think I can say safely 95% of the time, websites are not the system of record for any content. It is a communications tool, not a record-keeping system. Once you can help them understand that, and if you can partner with your agency's system of records and your records management team, that will help you. And two, search. Search is the biggest thing because I've never met a client who didn't complain about their search. And if you help them understand, if you cut your 20,000 page website down to 500, people will find exactly what they're looking for because they only have 500 results to search through. So even in the worst case scenario, they only have 10 paginated pages to look at. It will help, and that really has made that argument kind of fly a little bit smoother.
Some groups or agencies that have to deal with that say, oh no, we have to have that record. So we can convince them to say, okay, well, past time X, we're going to put that in an archive that basically lives kind of how it is. And big disclaimer in front of it says there's creative monsters here because this is just an archive.
So this is a shameless plug. I'm going to go ahead and admit that. But we gave a session at Chief on Wednesday called Limbering Up Drupal. And at the end, we had a few of these admin tricks that we do to help people with exactly that. Like building a view that's only going to show things that are older than 3 years, and then having people go through and have checkboxes and use useful elaboration to archive them, and then have that kick into something in your theme. I'm a huge nerd about that kind of thing. And showing them, building an archive system like that, I think the challenge is that a lot of times clients will be like, well, if you give us the archive system, then we want to be able to just move everything over and archive it. And that's going to be reasonable, right? And that's part of why having this, having the inventory done when you're setting your scope is such a good tool. Because if you say, doing this much content is going to affect how long it takes us to launch your website, people react to that, I think, better than that's the single most powerful argument. Analytics are great, it's hurting you, the users are great, search is great, but the single most powerful argument I've ever found has been more content equals more time, and that's when people start engaging and making those decisions.
Especially at the higher levels. They'll step in and actually talk to their teams if you say, we're going to blow the launch deadline. Then they'll care.
I have a question about FAQs, and I'm moving over to an agency that's in the middle of kind of migrating stuff to Drupal, and they've compromised, and they're having FAQ pages for all these websites that are pulling together. And that just drives me crazy because it seems like if you have to have an FAQ page, you've already failed because you're not sharing the information that people must be looking for frequently. if they are really FAQs. I mean, do you deal with that a lot? And is
I
that
have-
something you've had to argue?
Go ahead.
We're gonna have the opposite viewpoints. You go first.
Okay. Well, I'll give my content strategy hat viewpoint versus the director of tech viewpoint. Hey, she can throw the jabs. So the argument that I've tried to make with clients who want that is that it's going to confuse the search. If you have a page that has a lot of information about how to process, like file this form and do this thing, and you also have a how to file this complaint page, your search isn't going to know where people are supposed to go. So I think the argument that we've made is twofold. One, search. You want the information about that topic to be exactly where it should be, so that it's the most searchable for Google and internal search, Bing as well. But you also want to make sure that it's going to be updated. Because the biggest problem that we've found is that FAQs aren't updated. So what was is it actually frequently asked, or is it someone sent you one email one time about this question? Respond to that email and then move on with your life. But if it actually is a question you get a lot, either your website isn't doing its job, so make that information more plain or more higher up in your navigation so it's easier to find, or make sure that you understand that you're going to have to maintain that. So if you have an FAQ that talks about a policy that just got announced, right? It's a big thing, it's new, there's some new federal regulation about seatbelts. If you put that in your FAQ and then the regulation changes in 6 months, now you have to change it on your regulation section and your FAQ, or else your website is now giving people the incorrect information. And that can really help sometimes with that argument. But people are going to want their FAQs, so figuring out who's responsible for updating it and talking to that person and getting them to talk to their boss is usually the best inroad there.
So I'm not going to totally disagree with that, because I think all of that is 100% right from a content strategy viewpoint. I also think that there are times when you're undertaking such a large migration that you don't have time to fix all your content. And in those narrow situations, there is a time when FAQs can be helpful. It can be, I think that an FAQ about where to find something on the website is not my favorite. But if your agency does deal with a lot of things offline, if people are coming to say, like, what is it, how often does this thing happen? And it might be a little bit easier for them to get some response from Google phrasing it as a question occasionally. That's extremely narrow, like don't use that as a justification. But there are very limited times when an FAQ can be helpful to orient people, especially after a new site launches. But in the long run, it's absolutely better to make your website actually have the content in a good structured place. See how it's close.
That's how we partner. It's our Wonder Twins.
Anybody else?
I just want to thank you for mentioning do your inventory or analytics up front, because we'll get some of the come back and say, hey, there's all these links that are broken. It's like they were broken on your site before. Here are 3 things you can do about it. You can fix them, or you can put up a disclaimer, or you can kill the link.
And even worse than that, probably the worst way, I think, the worst way I've ever seen someone get burned, who fortunately was not at either of our agencies, was by saying they did an FFP contract to do a migration, and they didn't dictate whether or not they would do the remediation of the PDFs for accessibility. So you're going to want to disclaim that too. If they have 5,000 PDFs, maybe make sure that there's a line in your proposal if you're an agency, or just in your project scope document. If you're in government, saying like, this is what is in scope for us to fix. It's not in scope for us to fix your links, to fix your PDFs, or alternatively, it's absolutely in scope, and we would love to do it, but we need the budget and timeline to reflect that.
This might be more of a question for anybody who's on the government side, but you guys might have thought as well. And that's like, so if you're doing a large site, there's a lot to be said for let's migrate what we can, the best way that we can, and sort of iron out some of the content details, other issues later. But then there's this issue of the agency when they care, right? So if you move static HTML to Drupal, you've got the excitement, right, of being like, we're getting a new site, right? So you might get commitment of resources and whatever to do everything you can. And if you just do the migration, get into Drupal, and then say we'll deal with it later, the agency might not care anymore, right? I mean, and from a contractor perspective, so I mean, like from the government side, then you're stuck with this site that you migrated into Drupal, you didn't do all the things that you probably should have done, and the agency no longer cares.
We just lost one of our chief content strategists just walked out the door, which is sad because I want her to respond to that. But yeah, oh, sorry, you can. The major thing I think there is knowing where people really care and knowing in advance, like, it is going to be such a huge boon. Maybe you find this out during the audit phase. You're like, rewriting this section is going to be so, so good for you. That even if you have a massive site and don't have the time to totally rewrite, you're like, this is where if we sink this much effort, you're going to get this much ROI. And that is really important, and then you can budget around that. I think I would like it, and typically we do see that even for really large sites, some level of rewriting is being undertaken, even if it's only on landing pages and like the second level pages maybe. But that is, I would agree with that 100%. I think it's important to capitalize on that when you have it.
I completely agree, and I think also you can really get some wins just by restructuring. So I would say maybe even if you don't have time for rewrites, restructuring a section can really help. That's my big beast for my upcoming project. Is the grant section is completely unusable right now. You didn't hear me say that. And so, dang it. And so, I'm not going to spend almost any time on their about section. Like bios are bios. Maybe they could be written better and it could be more user rich, but like some people in the press might care and nobody else will. So they can keep that exactly as is. It's not my problem. But the grant section is where I'm going to sink my time and really make the sites shine. So I think if you do that kind of trade-off where you're like, okay, your regulations are going to be dense no matter what. We maybe could roll some nice intro language up there, but in general, if you're looking at a regulation, you want the specific language. So plain languaging it is going to do people a disservice more than a service. So I'm going to leave that section alone, leave the about alone, and really focus on your programs and your grants and some of that content and make that really work. Even if it's just when I copy and pasted from this page, I put some headers in there so it'd be a little easier to read. That kind of is where I try to find those wins.
So we're going to cut it off because I think we're already like 5 minutes over. Thank you guys very much for coming.